The biggest story of the Premier League right now is the Saudi Arabian takeover of Newcastle United. And Qué Golazo today has a special episode for you as we welcome the Athletics' Chris Waugh. We are so excited to welcome him to discuss this new journey for Newcastle, what it means, what happened before the end of the Ashley era, and so much more. Qué Golazo begins right now. Hey everybody, welcome to Qué Golazo. Thank you so much for tuning in. Make sure that you follow us on Twitter, Qué Golazo Pod, Spotify, Stitcher, and of course CBS Sports and your CBS Sports app. We are also on YouTube. If you're watching this, you know that already. Make sure that you press that notification bell so you get all the latest episodes. Right then, this is a very, very special episode, first of all, because it's the debut, and we welcome Chris Waugh, the Athletics senior correspondent for Newcastle United. He does tremendous work. One day I will sit with him and we'll talk about the Norberto Solano days, because I have a very soft spot for this club. But obviously, very, very big news as Newcastle United have new owners. Chris, by the way, welcome to the show. How are you, my friend? Have you slept at all?
Hello, thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure. I haven't slept that much. It's been a sort of whirlwind, I'd say, since about 11 o'clock on Wednesday morning in the UK time, just basically been non-stop since then. And yes, exciting times, phone calls all the time, trying to get information, writing things, trying to find out exactly what's happening, trying to battle with so many different emotions and disbelief, really. But yes, it's been a real roller coaster ride. But Mike Ashley is gone, and I think for Newcastle United fans, that has been the overriding emotion, one of relief that Mike Ashley's 14 years and 4 months finally is gone.
Yeah, we will definitely begin there, Chris. But before we do that, I wanted to direct everybody to Chris on Twitter, by the way, Chris DH Waugh as well. And he has latest stuff from the Athletics, specifically how Newcastle got here in the first place, everything that came before, and what happens now. Because obviously this is very big news, but also it comes with controversy as well. So we have to discuss that as well. But Chris, let's begin about exactly what you said right there. The Mike Ashley era is gone. 14 years, 2 relegations, 1 season of European football. Is there anything good to say about his reign? Was it all terrible? How do you see it?
It wasn't all terrible, but I'd say that 99% of it was. And the frustrating thing about Mike Ashley's reign was that it didn't have to be the way that it was. And when he first arrived in 2007, actually there was a lot of positivity, and he had about nearly a year of that, where it was a billionaire arriving as owner of Newcastle. He spoke big things. The Freddie Shepherd and Hall era from previously, they were the previous owners, that had gone stale. It needed something fresh. It needed something different. And when Mike Ashley first arrived, that could have happened. But it's through his own decisions and his own belligerence that things turned out the way that they did. He brought in Kevin Keegan almost on a whim, who was a club legend, hadn't been a player and a massively successful player and massively successful manager at Newcastle, transformed the club during the 90s to create the entertainers, and really treated him with disdain. And that just continued with other club legends. Alan Shearer was brought in as manager for 8 games. Newcastle went down in the end because it was the end of that season. Mike Ashley said that it was the best decision he ever made and that Alan Shearer was going to get the opportunity to bring them back. They shook hands on that at the training ground. Then he never called Alan Shearer back. And it's just been mistake after mistake. The stadium was renamed after his own company. He put his company plastered basically all over St James's, defacing, in many fans' views, the stadium. There are just so many things. Jonas Gutierrez, who was a player for Newcastle, he had testicular cancer, and he eventually won an employment tribunal against the club because essentially they stopped playing him because of that. There are so many different reasons why Mike Ashley was loathed and resented. And another part of it was just the club was stagnant, and it just felt like nothing was ever going to change. It had been up for sale in theory for the best part of the 14 years he'd been at Newcastle, but a sale hadn't come to fruition. This own takeover saga, as I'm sure we're going to get onto, dragged on for more than 18 months. And it just needed something fresh. It needed something different. So many fans had walked away, had to give away 10,000 free season tickets in the 2019-20 season to a club who were famous, have always been famous for its fans turning up. That bond was broken by Mike Ashley. And so now he's finally gone, and it just feels like such a huge release, and that the person who was basically a boot stamping down in the club has been lifted from them.
Yeah, no, I wanted to begin with that question, Chris, because I grew up in England in the 90s. And even though I'm a lifelong Villa fan, I have such a soft spot for Newcastle because of the entertainers, but because exactly what you're talking about, St. James's Park, always full. Everybody was just like celebrating, not just victories, and they were very big ones, but also just, the energy and the passion of the community and the city itself. And I felt like Mike Ashley kind of just like on purpose, sometimes it felt like did it to just completely reverse all of that. So that's why I wanted to begin with Ashley. But let's begin now. Let's talk about this Saudi ownership, okay? Public Investment Fund, PIF, is not the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, according to obviously what's happening with the Premier League and in accordance in the relationship that they have and what that took in order for them to accept this. Why does that matter to the Premier League? Because apparently that's basically the be-all end-all that created this new ownership.
Yes, so this is part of the reason why the takeover saga. So, I mean, this deal essentially has been, really, if you go back to the start, 4 years in the making. I mean, Amanda Staveley, in a different guise, basically of her own accord, tried to buy the club. She made 3 offers in November 2017. They were all rejected by Mike Ashley, and eventually she came back with this consortium, which is 10% her PCP Capital Partners company, 10% the Reuben brothers, who are billionaire investors, the second in the Sunday Times rich list for UK richest people, and then 80% the Saudi Arabian Public Investment Fund, which is essentially the sovereign wealth fund of Saudi Arabia. So that deal, an offer was eventually accepted in April 2020. And it was submitted to the owners and directors test, but it never got past the owners and directors test. And this is where it gets technical. And it progressed. Basically, eventually, the reason why it didn't pass the owners and directors test was because the Premier League came back and said the Saudi PIF is an extension of the Saudi state itself and wanted to put Saudi representatives of the government through its own owners and directors test. The Saudis rejected, or PIF rejected this and said that wasn't true, eventually withdrawing their bid. And then there was two legal cases essentially launched by Mike Ashley. But essentially, the main problem was always to do with TV piracy and alleged piracy from Saudi Arabia towards beIN Sports, who own the rights to Premier League football in MENA, which is the Middle Eastern region, including Saudi Arabia. And beIN Sports was banned from being broadcast in that region. So essentially, as long as beIN Sports was banned there, and as long as there was no actual legal way of fans in Saudi Arabia to watch the Premier League, there was no chance that Newcastle United seemingly were going to be allowed to be taken over by the group. Right. Eventually, we've had this thawing of tensions, and over the course of the last week, beIN Sports suddenly, as of Wednesday, is able to be broadcast in Saudi Arabia. The Premier League still insist that no, this is all to do with the reassurances they've had that the Saudi state will not be involved in PIF. But how come those reassurances that weren't there previously in the 18 months previously, it still seems to be the same makeup as it was before, and it very much seems to have come down to piracy. So all of a sudden, that logjam was lifted, and then Takeover came back on Wednesday. And what was astonishing was we didn't know anything about this really. One of the legal cases had been going on last week. I was covering that. Then Wednesday morning, I was on the phone to a French coach about Alan Saint-Maximin, someone who used to coach him. And I was speaking pidgin French to him. My French isn't brilliant, but it's okay. And I was getting loads of phone calls from my colleague, George Culkin, trying to ring me. And eventually he texted me and said, you have to answer the phone now. So I had to hang up on this guy. So George then rang me to say he was at a hotel nearby, that the takeover is back on. This is before the beIN Sports stuff back in. We need to get to work on this. And then ever since then, it's just been absolutely non-stop. And the takeover by 5:18 p.m. UK time yesterday was fully concluded.
So a simple question, I guess. How is the city right now and the fans and everything?
The city feels alive again. I mean, it really felt like there's been sort of a sudden injection of energy around St. James's Park last night. Thousands of fans gathered. They were all drinking. It became a thing when the takeover was initially going to happen. Hashtag cans on social media, which was essentially to celebrate the end of Mike Ashley's era. Everyone was going to have a can of whatever it may be. So there was a lot of beer drank in the centre of Newcastle. And yeah, people feel...
That's just a regular day though, isn't it, Chris?
Well, quite, yeah. Even more, I had an extra one, I suppose, would be the best way of seeing it. But it just I think the overwhelming emotion is one of relief and of release. That's what it feels like, that Mike Ashley's gone. And I think obviously we're going to get on to the controversy of Saudi Arabia and also the potential excitement football-wise of what could come. But I think more than anything, that outpouring has come because of the fact that Mike Ashley's gone. There were tears in the streets, and part of it is because so many people have walked away. So many friendships have become strained because some people are still going to the match, some people won't. And some people who I got emotional on our own podcast, Athletics Podcast Pod on the Tyne earlier, because Taylor Payne, the host, was telling me that his son, Jackson, basically said to him, "Dad, why can't I go to the match?" And Taylor wouldn't go back until Mike Ashley left, and he says that he can't wait for that moment to be able to walk up those steps with his son again. And so I know with everything we're going to come on to, that seems very strange and it seems conflicted, and it is. But it's a very nuanced situation because this is almost more about Mike Ashley going than anything else.
Yeah, that's the key point right there that I think people need to remember. Of course, we have to talk about the contract, and we will. We're going to get to it right now. But the main thing that I took away as I'm looking at all those fans is the departure and the exit of Mike Ashley. And that in itself is such a big celebration. All right, so let's get to it then, because obviously, everybody also lives under the scope of what's going on around the world, and Saudi Arabia, of course, dealing with a reputation with human rights violation. Of course, we know Amnesty International had already their huge, anti, approval of this and of the takeover. We obviously know Mohammed bin Salman, of course, and the news in the past previously also Jamal Khashoggi as well, and what happened to him. There's just so much in terms of controversy. How first of all, how do you see it? What's your own perception as we get into this and the takeover?
I mean, I've sort of had 18 months to try and process this, and I still can't really either in terms of that. I feel conflicted as someone who's grown up in Newcastle my whole life, as someone who has a keen connection with the club. I do feel conflicted about Saudi involvement and the fact that where the money is coming from and all of the issues that you raised before, all sort of do with sort of LGBT rights and everything to do with that and women's rights and so much more. I have a concern about, and I understand that for some fans it's too much, and some fans, and I think it's a minority, but equally some fans just, I don't think, want anything to do with the club and that, guys, and I can fully appreciate that, and it may be the red line for some people. Elsewhere, you may look at it and go, well, Russian involvement at Chelsea, Roman Abramovich has been there for a long while. You have Man City's owners, you have PSG's owners. Unfortunately, money talks in the world at the moment, particularly in big business, and the Premier League is big business. Saudi Arabia does billions of pounds worth of trade with the UK government every year. They are invested in so many companies like Uber and Disney and the like, and that doesn't make it right that they're involved in Newcastle United. And if I'm being honest, if I was to have picked owners, would I have wanted the Saudi Arabian PIF to be involved with Newcastle? No, I wouldn't have done. But unfortunately, I and Newcastle United fans don't get to pick the owner. Yes, a large proportion of supporters polled in many different polls, including the Newcastle United Supporters Trust, have said that they support this takeover. But I don't think that necessarily means that they are people who are going to be uneducated. I think that's what we need to do because of this. We need to be aware of all of the issues that are there. We need to face them head on because this is not going away. And every time Newcastle United is mentioned now, and particularly if they are successful in the future, Saudi Arabia, human rights, all of the other issues are going to be raised over and over again. And we shouldn't be alienating them, and we should try and push against that. And we should hope that in the future, change may come because of it. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that because the PIF own 80% stake in Newcastle United, that suddenly that's going to help Saudi Arabia reform itself in so many ways as we would all like to see. But I do think that, seeing as that is the situation we are in, let's try and raise those issues ourselves. Let's tackle them head on. Let's discuss them. Let's talk about them. Let's try and affect change. Some people may argue that Newcastle United are complicit in that, but I think that's unfair on supporters out there. They didn't choose this. This is a transaction between a billionaire and a company worth 350 billion or whatever they're worth. This is not Newcastle United fans' fault that this has happened. And I don't think it's mutually exclusive to be delighted Mike Ashley's gone, excited about the potential for the football club in terms of actual on-field wise, but also feel conflicted and uncomfortable in the situation that you're in.
Yeah, well said. I think there's two things there that you said that are spot on. One of them is, it takes all of us to, find out your local, communities and organizations that do a lot of really good work to fight things like human rights violations and obviously LGBTQIA issues as well. And on the same side, which is something that I'm beginning to see a little bit too much. There's a little bit too much finger pointing at fans who have literally no say in this situation. So those are two key points. Of course, we all, are worth a voice and an opinion, but I think that the anger is misdirected sometimes, and that's an important thing that you just said, Chris. All right, let's get back to football for a second, because a manager I know very well, who didn't do too much for Aston Villa, went to Newcastle. I warned every friend of mine. My cousin is a lifelong Newcastle fan. I said, get ready, because Bruce Bowl is not exactly what you think is going to be. And here we are. What's the fate of Steve Bruce, do you think, Chris?
I think it's now just a matter of when, not if, he's going to leave as Newcastle United head coach. The new ownership, because everything's happened so quickly, they haven't, as far as I'm aware, my understanding is there isn't anyone necessarily lined up to replace Steve Bruce yet. But Graham Jones, who came in as assistant in January, has been seen as a caretaker and waiting for a long while. And I think that if in the very short term he needed to take over for a little bit, that might happen. Steve Bruce, I think, will go. I think it's looking increasingly doubtful he'll be on the touchline for Newcastle's next game, which is against Tottenham Hotspur a week on Sunday.
That quick, huh?
Well, I think that there's just a feeling that, or at least the problem with the consortium is there's three different elements to it, as I mentioned earlier, and I think that the decision making can take a bit of time. But equally, I think there's a growing acceptance that if they want a clean break from the Mike Ashley era, Steve Bruce this season he's been deeply unpopular with supporters. They've chanted for him to go. There was a supporters trust survey earlier this week which had 94% of fans wanted him to leave. And so I think in terms of just making that clean break, the Spurs game, there's going to be a day of celebration. And I'm not saying Steve Bruce being there would ruin that, but I just think it puts a little bit of a dampener on things in terms of that new, fresh start. If Steve Bruce is gone before then at least it feels like a change of things. So I think the likelihood is that Steve Bruce goes sooner rather than later.
Are there any reported candidates that could maybe be in line to take over?
There's been a lot of people linked, but my understanding is there isn't actually someone identified yet. Antonio Conte has been linked. Eddie Howe's been linked for ages. Steven Gerrard. I mean, if timelines had aligned, there was a period where this consortium hoped that Rafa Benitez would return. This was before he went to Everton, but now he's at Everton. He doesn't break contract. He won't be Newcastle United's next manager. Mikel Arteta was like, this has gone on for so long that Mikel Arteta was initially like before he went to Arsenal, and he could have been an option. But as of yet, no, they're still working on exactly which direction they want to go in. And I think they're also looking for a sporting director. And I think whoever they pick as sporting director could influence managerial choice as well, because obviously they need that relationship to work if they want to be successful.
God, Antonio Conte at St. James's Park would be something, huh? That would be pretty amazing. Imagine him with a Geordie accent when he does some interviews as well. That'll be interesting. All right. Is it too soon to speculate about January transfers? You mentioned St. Maximin, who I just think is beyond ridiculous. He's superhuman sometimes when you watch him play. But, you know, he was tweeting yesterday, obviously feeling confident about the future, Callum Wilson as well. But January now becomes very interesting for Newcastle, especially independent to where they are in the table. Are there any reports or anybody, specific positions that you think, wow, they're going to really take a look at this now?
Well, again, like the managerial situation, they're still going to determine that. And I think the head coach, manager, whichever they decide to appoint, and sporting director will have big influence on that. But they have been looking at transfer targets for a long while. The list is constantly being updated because the fact that the takeover's dragged on for so long. I mean, previously they looked at the likes of Ferran Torres before he went to Man City. Same with Nathan Ake. Those are the sort of players. My understanding is there's not going to be a sort of massive splurge in January. I think that there are tens of millions to spend, but sort of lower tens of millions, and they're going to look to augment the squad, make sure that they survive, first of all, because Newcastle, have to remember, are second bottom of the Premier League. They haven't won yet this season. And so to make sure they survive, and then you're more likely to see more sweeping changes in the summer window. It's very difficult to do too much in a January. So I think that they would ideally like another forward, because Callum Wilson's been out injured at the moment. He has a poor injury record as well in general. And when he's not fit, Newcastle lack goals. So I think they need a left back because they've been playing Matt Ritchie as a left back. Jamal Lewis doesn't seem to be in too many games, and also a centre back. So I think they'll probably be the 3 priority positions they'll be looking towards in January. The likes of Sam Maximan, my understanding is at least he's had been positively received the fact that the things have changed. He wanted Newcastle to progress, and I think that this makes it more and more likely that Alan Saint-Maximin will stay at Newcastle United.
Yeah, do me a favor, promote Rodrigo Vilca back from Doncaster and just put him in that lineup. Let's get another Peruvian in there. All right, let's finish off here. Chris, how much potential for growth are we talking about here? Because obviously we know now that the sky's the limit, I guess, so to speak. But are Newcastle United, you think, in the journey, in the path of looking at someone like Manchester City or Chelsea or PSG? And also, I guess part of that question is, how long do you think will it take? I know that it's very early, and I know there's a lot of optimism, but obviously this is a step-by-step process. How do you see it as we look, not just this season, but the one after and after that?
Well, Amanda Staveley herself is quoted yesterday as saying that within 5 to 10 years, they want to win the Premier League, which seems a bold statement. And the interesting thing about all of her comments over the last sort of 12 hours or so is that she's talking about it being a process which is going to take time. They're not going to, because of financial fair play regulations, which essentially prevent you from just going out and spending whatever you want in a short period of time. It's going to take a bit of time for Newcastle to be able to catch up with the big boys in the Premier League. And so I think that realistically, you're talking probably 3 to 5 years before they're going to start competing for trophies, maybe domestic sort of trophies. They're going to have to completely overhaul the squad, really. They need to upgrade in so many different ways. The Premier League now is different to Chelsea days when Roman Abramovich came in. You had Man United and Arsenal, and they were the only real challengers. Man City, Liverpool still didn't have the money really then. Also, you didn't have Spurs at that point. So if you just look at the financial gap between Newcastle and the so-called Rebel Six, Top Six, whatever you want to call them, there is a big gap to bridge. And so I think it's going to be an organic process to a certain extent, although money will be poured in by the investment fund. And so I think that we're talking that they'll want, probably within the next year, they'll want to be top 10 and then top 8, and then you're probably talking top 6 and then beyond. So I think that within 5 to 7 years, they'd want to be challenging, certainly domestically, if not beyond.
Well, one thing is for certain, Newcastle United are riding a brand new path, and we will see where that will take them. Chris Waugh from The Athletic. Follow his work, by the way, Chris, on Twitter, which is once again Chris DH Waugh as well. All his great content is right there. And of course, that podcast that you mentioned, which is on The Tyne, a weekly podcast as well. Chris, thank you so much, my friend. Get some sleep, eat some food, make sure that you get your energy, because I'm telling you, you're going to get all these requests every single hour. Thanks so much, my friend.
Anytime. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Make sure that you follow us on Twitter, Qué Golazo Pod, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, as well as Stitcher. We are everywhere on CBS Sports and your CBS Sports app. We will see you next time.